All righty. Hey, good evening, guys, everyone, and welcome to tonight's discussion on affordable housing, hosted by Oregon Housing and Community Services and the Yamhill Community Action Partnership and the City of McMinnville. Tonight's panel session is being streamed live courtesy of Dave Adams and KLYC. And for those watching out in digital land, I just want to make sure that you're aware that we will be monitoring the chat room tonight. So for those out in digital land, please feel free to add your voice to the discussion once we begin the Q&A towards the end of tonight's session. Speaking of which, the lead for our digital operation is Pastor Courtney McHill from Cooperative Ministries, and I definitely want to thank her for being here tonight because it's great to have somebody under 30 operating the digital piece versus somebody under 60. I just want to say it works much better. Also, finally, I want to recognize that Jerry Eichten, he's somewhere back in the bowels of our audio-visual room. But if you don't know Jerry, he is with McMinnville Community Media, and he will be taping tonight's session for later broadcast on his particular TV channel stations later on in the week. So, if you would, with all this media, if you'll take out your cell phone and put it on silent, that would be awesome. So, because we don't want all those folks out there in media land, hearing your ringtone. So that would be awesome. All right. So, now let's get to the stars of tonight's show, our panelists. Starting off with Marilyn Miller. She's in the middle there, and she is the lead policy program specialist at Oregon Health and Community Services. If you don't know it, Oregon Health and Community Services administers federal and state anti-poverty, homeless and energy assistance, and community service programs. While it oversees a myriad of programs, some of its largest assist in the financing of single-family homes and the new construction of rehabilitation or of multifamily affordable housing developments. So involved in an over $1 billion budget, and they do a lot of good work across Oregon. Speaking of good work here in the local community, Lee Means is the Chief Executive Officer at the Yamhill County Action Partnership, or as most of us know it, YCAP. YCAP is a private, nonprofit organization serving the residents of Yamhill County since 1980. And it's an interesting organization because it's one of over 1,000 community action agencies nationwide advocating for and assisting persons toward self-sufficiency. And it serves here for us as probably the primary entry point for individuals who need assistance. To do this, if you didn't know it, YCAP has a suite of services available, ranging from career assistance to housing to food banks. And finally, as part of Yamhill County's 10-year plan to end homelessness, YCAP coordinates the count of those individuals who are experiencing homelessness. So I'm hoping that Lee can speak a little bit to the numbers, and maybe not to this year's numbers yet, because as I understand, they're still being tweaked. But I bet you she can bring us something on trends over the last few, maybe past 5 years. What do you think, Lee?
Actually, you're right. And we did just get the go-ahead on the numbers.
Hey, look at that. Timing's everything. Okay, so hopefully we'll hear some of the very latest numbers. Now, on Marilyn's right is Bill Hall. He's a Lincoln County Commissioner, and he comes tonight as our community mentor. And he brings a wealth of experience. He was chair of the Governor's Council on Alcohol and Drug Programs and co-chair of the Oregon Ending Homelessness Advisory Council. In 2008, Commissioner Hall was honored with the Home for Every American Award presented by the U.S. Interagency Council on Homelessness. In 2009, he received the Award for Excellence from the Association of Oregon Community Mental Health Programs for his advocacy in the state. He co-authored Lincoln County's 10-year housing plan, which may interest some of y'all because it had a special focus on the chronic homeless. So, Bill, I don't know how you found time to be with us here tonight, because I also understand as of tonight he's an author. He just delivered his latest book to Third Street Books, and congratulations on that. Thank you for being here with us tonight. Lise Huey's another one of our local helping agencies, and she's the executive director of the Housing Authority of Yamhill County, overseeing a wide range of helping programs, and is the lead for Yamhill County's 10-year homeless plan. Working with Lee over at YCAP, the Housing Authority administers several housing programs utilizing federal, state, and or local funds. These encompass 299 family housing units, 42 units for special needs, 190 units for our seniors, and 54 housing units for farm worker families. I know that may surprise some of you all who don't think that those facilities reside here in Yamhill County, but let me tell you that Elise and Lee are doing some really great work to get folks into housing. Working with the lease, the latest for the citizens of McMinnville is the Housing Authority has obtained a $400,000 block grant that will help approximately about 60 low-income households living in manufactured housing to make improvements such as to their roofs or to make them ADA compliant. So if YCAP is the entry point for many individuals in need, then the Housing Authority, it provides the longer term, do you think it's a correct, accurate way to say it? Longer term helping hand for those who are in need that just can't get out of needing some kind of hand. So, and then wrapping up, we have Rick Middleton over there who joins us tonight as a concerned citizen and wants to make a difference. And he is an active volunteer in our Gospel Rescue mission. And if you don't know this organization, Yamhill's County Gospel Rescue Mission is a nonprofit Christian organization founded in 2004 by a small group that saw a need for an emergency shelter here in Yamhill County. Rick, thank you for being here tonight, and I'm sure that you're going to provide valuable insight as you work on that front line or the triage services for our homeless. So once again, I want to thank all 5 of you for being here tonight, and I know you bring an incredible wealth of experience and advice that we can all learn from. All right, enough with the introductions. Tonight's forum is titled Let's Talk Housing, and more specifically, what this community believes its priorities should be over the next 5 years. But before we can figure out what our priorities should be, we should probably figure out a little bit of education so we can all get on the same plane of knowledge. And so that's kind of where we'd like to start out tonight, is what is the need for this community? And I'd like to start with Marilyn, because in her service at the Oregon state level, she's seen a lot, she's toured Oregon a lot, and so she brings with us a special knowledge base that we haven't had here before. So Marilyn, thanks again for being here, and I'd like to let you lead off with a little bit about, can you tell us, one, what is affordable housing? And then any trends that you're seeing across Oregon as you do forums like this, on where some of the greatest need is based on your experience.
I think I pushed the button. Thank you. It's my pleasure to be here. When I saw the question, what is affordable housing, I started thinking, well, it's kind of relative. It's what people can afford, and that varies on who they are and where they are. From a programmatic standpoint and development of housing, it typically is housing that is affordable to low-income folks. With that said, that is a relative term too. However, in the housing world, low income is 80% of area median income down to 0. Most of our housing that we finance at Oregon Housing and Community Services is for folks 60% to 50% of median income. So if you look at, I was pulling some data, sorry, I hope I didn't steal your data.
Nope.
For Yamhill County in 2015, a very low income person, which is most of what our housing addresses, for a family of 4, that would be an income of $36,750. So that gives you context. As a former provider of homeless services, I can tell you most of the folks that we served who were homeless didn't come close to that. And so there is a real challenge in being able to build and develop housing and have that viable financially and yet still accessible to people, again, in many cases, who have 0 income, or at least start out with that. The trends that we're seeing are really disturbing on several levels. One, we're seeing low vacancy rates throughout the state like we've never seen before. I was talking to someone in Central Oregon and I said, yeah, you guys are at 1%. They go, no, we're below 1%. And I know there's other communities, the metro area, it has terrible, the coastal area typically has had low vacancy rates. So what does that mean? Well, first of all, it means that there's not as much housing, rental housing available, but more importantly, it means that low income and homeless folks who often come with barriers in the best of times, now are competing with folks who in the past didn't have any problems finding rental housing at whatever price. So that has been a challenge. We're also seeing more families who are doubling up, who simply, and when I say double up, it's not necessarily two families. I was talking to someone where there's 4 families living with someone and putting that person at risk of losing their housing, but that's the only option they have. In talking to programmatic people like Lee and others, we're finding that in our program we want to move people as quickly as possible into housing, and we can't do it because there's not that housing at the end. And another trend, of course, is the rent burden is going up. Ideally, people use 30% of income should be spent on rent. That's doable, and that has been gone up to where it's probably more around 50% of rent burden, if not higher, for low-income folks that we're serving. Again, I think some of the greatest need, there's kind of 2 ways. There's a geographic and there's a people need. If you look at the homeless data that has come out, you'll see that the fastest growing homeless population is families with children. And that's very disturbing for obvious reasons. Overall, the state has seen a decrease in homeless based on the point-in-time count that we have. And while there's some challenges to what that really means, it is the only it is the only measure we have where we actually go out and count that. And so, so we are trending in the right direction. Whether that trend is normal, I mean, is actual or not, is debatable. But areas where I think we've always seen challenges with poverty and housing are even worse now. So I think if you, the coastal area where you've got this dynamic of higher end folks coming in and buying houses because it's beautiful, it is beautiful on the coast and you want to live there. But it raises the housing values. I know Hood River County had the same issue. Bend, until the recession hit and starting to come back, had the same issue. So as people come in and get second homes, as people move in with higher incomes, it raises the rent of that of the housing that's available there, so that low-income people and I want to note something. The majority of low-income people work. So this is not about people, well, they're not working so they can't get it. These are people that work, sometimes 2 and 3 jobs, and they still cannot afford housing in those communities. I'm going to stop there because really the experts are here beside me. So.
Thanks, Marilyn. And I think I've heard Lee mention the comments as well, that some of the surprises that people were mentioning to her referenced the homeless count was that there were individuals who were fully employed on that role. So Lee, I think we're all breathlessly waiting, probably you're the star of the night, on what you're seeing. And also, I think between you and Elise, if you could also speak more on what your agencies do. I just brushly touched on it, and I didn't do you any kind of justice. So if you could also take as long as you want to talk about what you provide, and then your assessment of where the need is.
Well, let me first start and filling in some of what Marilyn was talking about on the homeless count. We did just today get the authority to release the numbers that we have. Unfortunately, Yamhill County's numbers are having a difficulty in their database. So the number that we counted was 901 total. The number that's being reported in the state is 1,700. And the problem is it's pulling Clatsop County numbers into our numbers. So they've struggled and struggled to get that straightened out. They finally just said they're reporting it to the HUD. And I'm saying, okay, but that's really going to confuse our people here in Yamhill County. So just as an example, in 2011 we counted 620, 2012 815, 2013 540. Last year we counted 1,211. This year 901. That kind of gives you a sense of the count depends on how good we have people out there counting, what the weather's like. If the just got a flood that washed out all the homeless counts in the low areas, and any number of other things. As you were saying, one of the things that really surprised people here in Yamhill County, we not only do the HUD count, which is on the front page, we turn it over and we do a needs assessment of our own to figure out what it is we need to look for. When I sent that out, I had several people express total surprise that 45 out of 458 that reported on that back page were working full-time, and another 63 were working part-time or temporary work and couldn't find enough work to keep them busy. So that's out of 458, that's a sizable amount of people that are working full-time and still cannot afford a house for themselves. We see it constantly. We do provide housing assistance, rental assistance. It's more or less shorter term, probably up to 2 years in most cases. We try to move them through with case management into self-sufficiency, or either that or to a Section 8 housing voucher. The reasons for homelessness are so wide and so varied. There is no one solution to this. You don't see probably 80% of the homeless people or 90% of the homeless people. They're proud. They don't want people to know. They camp out in the bushes. They put 4 people into one house, and you never see them. When I arrived here 8 years ago, I was told over and over, we don't have a homeless problem. So 3 years later, I did the first homeless count, and they went, 620 people. Well, I guess we do have a homeless problem. And the ones you see on the street are the hardcore homeless, the people that are very difficult to serve. They're difficult to serve because they have criminal backgrounds, they have mental health issues, they are generational poverty in which they suffered so much trauma, their brain size is actually smaller, that didn't develop all the way. There's people with pedophiles and arsonists. They're very hard to find housing for. We have a difficult time finding housing for our seniors, let alone this hardcore group that's difficult. So many of the ones that you're going to see are the ones that are most difficult to work with, to house. Just housing people who are seniors, disabled, mentally ill is almost impossible. We had an elderly man come in, 87 years old, sleeping in his car, needed his brakes fixed. We fixed his brakes because we couldn't do anything else. We had waiting lists. We didn't have any way to help him. This was before Elise built Duskin's Commons and took some people off the waiting list, but the waiting list was closed. It was over 2 years long. The reason he was homeless, his wife died. Once the wife dies, he's only got one Social Security check coming in, and at $750 a check, you don't get a home. You don't get an apartment, there's just no way to deal with it. So he's living in his home. Unfortunately, we fixed his brakes, but I have no idea what happened to an 87-year-old man living in his car. It's very hard for my case managers to deal with those kinds of things. So does that kind of answer some of the challenges we're facing here?
It does, it does.
I have a question. Of the 900 people in Yamhill County that you determined to be homeless, what categories are they in? How many of them are children? How many of them are elderly? Do you have any idea?
I don't have the breakdown because I just got that this afternoon, but I can tell you from last year's count, the total families we counted were 602. The total number of people in the families was 1,211. Of that, 500 were children under the age of 18. That's 45% of the count was children under the age 18. Of the households, 41 of the people counted were unaccompanied children. In other words, teens that are on the street. That's quite a few, considering you can't, it's hard. When we do a count, it's only for like 3 or 4 hours in the day, and it's on the last week in January on a Wednesday. So the weather's nasty, sometimes it's really nasty, sometimes it's okay. And we count as many people as we can, but you're not going to count anywhere near all the homeless. Did that answer your question?
Yes, it goes to answer it.
I have other statistics. It breaks it down to the veterans and the domestic violence, and all those are broken down for last year I have.
Lee, if they want to see those specific numbers, where could they go once they leave here?
They could just email me and I'll send them out. I have this in an email I can send out.
Could we post it somewhere? Is that allowable, or does HUD keep the
Sure.
data?
No, I send it out through all the providers all the time, last year, so.
Okay, well, how about if we'll post it on the city website, at least as a start, and email works as well?
Great.
We had one question over here I saw.
Basically, how can we get this, no, the basic question was how will we get, and she answered that before. So, thank you.
Lee, is there a redefinition of HUD's criteria for who is homeless, such as couch surfing or any of that?
You probably want to ask Marilyn that question.
No, they have not changed their definition to include that. The Department of Ed, however, when they count homeless students, do use that doubled up. And some counties do count that in the count. They don't report it to HUD, but they have that count.
If you think you're getting perhaps underrepresented numbers by doing the count on a Wednesday, if you feel like you're getting underrepresented numbers by doing the count on a Wednesday in January with bad weather, and you have 45% of people are working, and presumably they'd be working, well, maybe not presumably they'd be working during those hours, but that is a high, a lot of people work during those hours. Has there been any consideration to perhaps moving the time of doing that count to summertime, weekend time, or any other time if you say that all these factors are affecting the final count?
Actually, HUD sets that, and it's set as the last week in January. We can pick the day on the last week in January, but it has to be done the last week in January. And they do it, I believe, and I guess I shouldn't say for sure, but this is my sense of why they do it, is because that's a time when people aren't moving around as much. the homeless are very mobile. And in the summer, they're up in the mountains, they're moving around to try and find jobs somewhere. It's harder to find them, and you may count them twice. We may count them here, and they may get counted in Marion County.
If I can just add to that, one of the things that the state is looking, there are states that do counts more than that one time. Lee's right, that's what HUD requires, but I know I was doing some research, and there's a few states that count in the winter, in the HUD time frame, and then in the summer as well. There's also some communities that have a lot of resources. I mean, an agency like Lee's cannot perform a point-in-time count to the extent that you need, so there are some places where there's great involvement of volunteers and just a variety of organizations to do a count that's much longer within that day. So I'm hoping one of the results of this forum is that Lee will get lots of calls from folks who want to help and volunteer and contribute to that effort.
I have to say, we do have a cadre of wonderful volunteers that do work those. And we put them out on teams in all of our communities, and they run different hours from early morning up till usually around noon is when we do it too.
Okay.
We can always use more volunteers. So.
Elise, after the home, I know that for the facilities that the county or the Yamaha County that you provide from the Housing Authority, your perspective in your position there, and then as we've established that we do have a homeless community, you're the lead for the 10-year plan. Could you talk a little bit about how the 10-year plan was formed and some of the foundational thought behind it?
Sure. So just to kind of talk about who the Housing Authority houses. Number one, we assist over 2,100 families a month through our different programs. And our largest program, which is the Section 8 program, we have about 1,343 vouchers. One of the things with vouchers are basically rental assistance certificates you take into the community with private landlords. If you're running up against an occupancy rate of 99.5% and you have a 0.5% vacancy rate, your vouchers aren't, they're not worth anything, right? Because you can't find a place to use them. So that's a little bit of the problem we're dealing with now. We actually had our Section 8 waiting list closed for 3.5 years, and that's because we had so many people on the waiting list that we couldn't get through them. So in all fairness to people who had been waiting up to 4 years, we went ahead and closed it. We had it closed for 3.5 years before we went through every single person off that waiting list. We reopened it in August 2014, so not too long ago, and we already have over 1,300 folks back on that waiting list. We have over 140 apply on average every month. And then in addition to those folks that are waiting, we have 193 additional folks that are waiting on our specific, we have 17 separate sites on their waiting list as well. On average, so Marilyn was talking a little bit on average who Oregon Housing Community Services serves, that's 50 to 60% income bracket. We actually, our average annual income for households we serve is $12,954 a year. That's on average, which is about $6.23 an hour. So you can tell we are required to, number one, by HUD, at least 75% of the families we serve have to be below 30% of median income. So Maryland gave you a figure of $36,750 for 50% of median income. It drops down to about $24,250 for 30%. And so 75% of all folks that we serve have to be below that threshold. And then you can tell by what I just gave you as our average annual income, it's even lower. So these are folks that without our assistance would not be able to pay rent. And 30%, about 30% of our households that we assist are disabled, about 15% are elderly, and 62 of our households assisted have children in them. So that's just some of our local stats and kind of what we're dealing with on a local level. And as far as the ending homelessness plan, we actually started our plan. I think Lincoln County might have beat us out just a little bit, but we actually, our Board of Commissioners had actually set a goal that they were going to start our plan in 2006. And in 2007, we started meeting, figuring out how can we move this forward. In 2008, we actually rolled out our ending homelessness plan for the county. And so right now, it's kind of been at a standstill just because, everybody's been busy. We have really focused on making sure we do this full-wide, county-wide count every year. That's one of our big goals, and the Community Connect event is our other big goal. And then just locally, our faith-based groups and our local service providers have stepped up to kind of make steps on the other things in the ending homelessness plan. I'm working on updates to the plan right now, but I know that the last time we reported, which was in 2013, we had made action steps. There was 40 in the plan, and we had made action. We had either completed or worked towards 35 of those steps. So there's great things going on locally that you just may not be aware of. Our biggest hindrance is lack of any affordable housing, and that's all types. So in our ending homelessness plan, some ending homelessness plans just focus on chronic homelessness. Ours focuses on the whole continuum, so, lack of shelters, lack of transitional housing, lack of affordable housing, lack of market rate housing, and then homeownership opportunities, because we see them as a continuum, and if you have lack at any one level, then everybody gets pushed down, and then eventually they're out on the street, which is kind of what happened when we had the recession. Is people got kicked out of their homes, they went into the market rate units, the market rate people ended up in more of the affordable units. Our folks struggle right now, as Marilyn was saying, with some background issues. You have sometimes not the best histories with some of the folks that are looking for housing, and if a landlord has to choose between somebody with a spotty background or maybe a little bit of a criminal record and somebody that has a stellar record, who are they going to go with? And so then those folks end up, and they're living in their cars, they're living in their trailers, they're living on the street. I think one of the big things as I work with the homeless population, and I don't do it directly through our agency, I do it as I volunteer, or with the homeless count. I've made an effort to be part of the homeless count so I can talk to the population that we're talking about, is that sometimes, it's circumstances beyond their control that cause them to be homeless. One of the guys that we work with at the soup kitchen and that I talk to at the count, 18 years, long haul truck driver, developed diabetes, he got laid off from work, he got fired, he didn't get laid off, difference in unemployment. Because they were afraid he was going to have seizures, he's looking for work. He's gone and applied for, fast food places, all the kinds of places. They won't hire him because his last 18 years has been as a long-haul truck driver. His wife was in the soup kitchen last Friday with pneumonia, and they're living in a trailer. I mean, it's really difficult to see these circumstances and not be able to do anything immediately about them. But, some of these kind of things, it's not something that's within their control. It's not because they're not trying. It's because of circumstance. The other thing that was kind of shocking to me is the number of 19 to 22-year-olds we have out there that are homeless. My son's 21, and, when I see kids his age that parents have kicked him out for whatever reason, because I only hear one side of it, but justified or not, you have somebody that's just trying to get their ground in life and they're suddenly homeless and just trying to figure out the homeless system, much less, get a job and finish up their education and those type of things. So, lots of barriers happen while that is happening, so it becomes cyclical.
Even before they get into the housing authority and then, seeking vouchers, Rick, you've seen a lot of these folks on what I will call triage housing. They don't have anywhere to go. They haven't been over to the housing authority yet. Haven't talked to Lee yet. They just need a place to sleep. And you probably see a little more of the chronic homeless, perhaps, than others. Could you give us your perspective?
Well, I'm not actually as close to the front line as some other people. I've done the volunteer work. There's some heroic people, some compassionate people that make an impact. I wish I could report that we made a larger impact in that 1,200 count for 2014. The 31-bed facility that we have really actually has a conditional use permit for a maximum of 17, so I can tell you that we're maxed out most nights. And the count for guests in 2014 was 144 people, and if you look at that demographic, we actually had a fairly higher count of the single individual men, specifically 55%, women and children with families, the other about 50% of that. So there's a constant wait list for us, though. 5 to 10 people, we have try to keep that cushion for the emergency bed thing, and 50% of the time we can do that. There's people that are brought to us through the churches, through law enforcement, through the other agencies. So that's about what I can add there. But the frontline stories, I'm sure they're all similar, and it woke me up about 4 years ago. Pretty good to hear some of them. So,
Commissioner Hall, you've heard the need, and I know you've done a lot of work on what it costs to both address the need and what it costs if you don't address the need. Can you talk a little bit about, from your experiences, what in the bigger picture is if a city or a county doesn't address it, some of those associated costs? Because I've heard you talk to some of that in a couple of articles. So if anything you have to offer would be appreciated.
Sure, happy to do that. Do some folks know the name Malcolm Gladwell? Writes for the New Yorker, has written some books. Probably his bestseller is The Tipping Point. He did an article, and I'd really encourage you, if you're interested in this at all, to look it up, called $1 Million Murray. I think you can find it online. It's also in a collection of his articles called What the Dog Saw. But basically, this introduces the concept of why permanent supportive housing really is cost effective. There were a couple of police officers in Reno, Nevada, who spent 20 years dealing with an ex-Marine who was also a chronic alcoholic named Murray Barr. And they would take him to the emergency room, they would take him to jail, he would cycle in and out of all kinds of public systems, the hospital, rehab, emergency shelter, transitional housing. As long as he was in a stable situation, he'd get clean for a period of time, but once he was out and once he was on his own again, the whole sad cycle repeated itself. And after he passed away, after more than 20 years on the street, these officers just got the idea of doing research and finding out what it had cost the people of Reno to have Murray be homeless, and it was more than $1 million. And that might be an extreme case, but it's not an isolated one by any means. There are multiple studies that I've seen, and the numbers vary a little bit, but basically you're talking about to give somebody supportive housing, housing with services, that's going to cost in the neighborhood of $20,000 a year. Versus essentially letting them remain homeless, that's going to be in the neighborhood of $100,000 a year or more, depending on the severity of their health problems and other issues. So we do have some of that out here. One of the things, just I guess lucky timing with our Lincoln County 10-year plan, which was right before yours. We started work on ours in 2005 and launched it in 2007. 2000 session of the Oregon legislature approved funding. They were aiming to create 150 units of permanent supportive housing statewide. Actually did better than that, if I remember right. Do you recall that? But I think it ended up being over 200. But anyway, because we had our plan and we're ready to go, we got 18 units in Lincoln County, which was the second highest number of any county in the state outside of Multnomah. So you're probably asking if this makes so much sense, both in terms of economic impact as well as better outcomes for people. You know, it doesn't work for everybody. Some people still, for whatever reason, wash out. But again, the numbers vary from study to study. But this kind of housing probably has a success rate in the neighborhood of 80% versus much lower for the traditional emergency shelter, transitional shelter, and then kind of a permanent housing situation at the end of the rainbow. So first, it's why don't we have more of it, you're probably wondering. It's very expensive, even though it's less expensive than letting somebody remain homeless. But I think the problem is the cost avoidance or cost savings doesn't necessarily credit back to the originating agency. And sometimes it's theoretically, unless, say, your jail can close a pod, then you don't see any actual savings on the books. You're just seeing people probably going into a facility that wouldn't be there otherwise. Now, sometimes it really does prove out. I know about 10, 12 years ago, I think it was, Seattle, which had 2 jails at the time, was looking at building a 3rd jail, and they said, no, jails are fantastically expensive to maintain, staffing them 24/7. And they said, let's put this money into supportive housing, homeless prevention programs, other supportive services, and they were able to put that plan for the 3rd jail on the shelf.
And you just mentioned something that will lead me to the next question. And Marilyn or anybody on the panel, if you want to chime in on this, you mentioned there's a spectrum, and you just mentioned the homeless prevention programs. What is your perspective on, there's a spectrum you can treat. There is the homeless, chronic on the street. There is back it up to, do you put dollars into perhaps sustaining people who have housing but are on the brink of losing that housing? Or do you back it up even further to try to prevent somebody from getting into low-income situation altogether?
That's a tough one. Could I jump on it first?
Please.
And then let the others? That the federal government, when in the early 2000s, when they put the focus on trying to address chronic homelessness, I remember the statistics I saw at the time. The argument was that the chronic street homeless, mostly singles, that's maybe only 10% of the total homeless population, but they were consuming 50% of the public resources. So the theory was if we could reduce chronic homelessness, then there'd be more resources to address other types of homelessness. Again, I'm not sure if it's played out in reality as well as you think it would in theory. I don't know if anybody saw that series not too long ago in the Oregonian about Portland and Multnomah County, where they made a huge commitment and put huge resources into addressing the problem, and yet they've got a problem that's worse than ever before because, again, we, like you, kind of took the idea that it's a continuum, and if you don't have adequate housing at every level, you're still going to, it's like a balloon that pops. You squeeze it one place, and if it doesn't pop there, it's going to expand and eventually pop somewhere else, unfortunately.
And real quick before I go on, could just for those in the audience, can somebody define a little bit on I've heard the word chronic homeless a couple times. Can you give us a quick tutorial of you've got a certain percentage that are transient homelessness, if that is a term, or how many folks that you see out there as chronic, and what do you term as chronic?
I probably ought to check with Sandra over there on this one. But the definition that I can think of is, and I don't remember it exactly, I can't remember whether it's 3 or 4 episodes of homelessness in the last 2 years, is that right? Four episodes of homelessness in the last 2 years. So that's chronic.
All right, thank you. And just your perspective on the spectrum of care and your thoughts on where you see the biggest need and versus the biggest return on dollar, if I'll just put it that way.
This is a really tough question. The causes are so wide, and the amount of need is so great that it's so hard to say. Where could you put some money and have it make a big impact? YCAP has a program for safe shelter for runaway and homeless youth. It has a transitional program for 17 to 21-year-olds that have been kicked out on the street, foster kids aging out. We have rental assistance. We have one-time help to keep people in houses that hit a hard spot, and if they don't pay their rent, they'll be kicked out. There's a number of different programs, most of which have waiting lists, as several people have already said. And each one hits a different group of the housing issues. I think the greatest need is housing, period. If we had housing, then we could get more people housed, and then there wouldn't be the people dying on the church steps because they homeless and they couldn't get to dialysis, or the various things that we've seen in this county in the last year. YCAP has a number of different programs, but we just simply can't serve enough people to keep them off the streets. I don't know if that didn't answer your question, and I've thought about, because people keep asking me, I keep thinking about, well, what could we do that's just one thing? We just got a grant for, it's going to come in at about $260,000 a year for 3 years to help veterans and their families with housing. Those veterans' families, often the veterans will be overseas, or they'll be coming back from overseas, and they just are really having a hard time. A lot of mental illness involved. So we have some money, and we won't get it for another 6 months, probably. I'm not sure when that grant's going to come through, the rock. But we'll be able to do it for 3 years. We're always looking for federal funding to bring into the county, because the more money I can bring into the county from federal and state, the more we can get done here.
Thank you. I would like to address the issues of the chronic, the hardcore, and the aged. Those seem to be some high numbers, and there's really no place to go in an emergency. The thing is what I got to ask, not the board, but our manager, Meeker, was that if the city had the property and had an emergency place for these people to land, with some small funds coming in, would it be possible to house them outside of the city church's steps?
And that's what we're talking here, as we reference the spectrum, is any dollars we spend, we want to make sure that that's where the people of the city want them spent. So you could spend them, do we spend them on the chronic homeless? Do we back it up and we spend it on keeping people that's low income in their current houses, or do we do something else? I don't know, but that's why the city council, if you take a look, it's their goal right now is to get educated to find out where, because it's also possible that other agencies will provide the emergency triage services. So this is going to be a community answer. I just don't know enough between what faith-based does, what private nonprofit does, what the city does, and how we divide this up.
What I'm trying to get at is that some of these chronic homelessness are problems in themselves, their lifestyles, their habits, and everything. But the thing is that we must acknowledge that there's going to be pedophiles in this group, and we need a place that we can segregate and individualize each section of what would be called a commune, or going back to a state of the poor farm. If we had a poor farm designed, then we'd have a place for people to land and cook and take care of their lives until something broke.
And I think that's, Rick has talked before about in his, and Rick, I'll give it to you, but you've mentioned before about the need, that there's a certain need for the hardcore single male that you see in your view that may work differently than how you house a family. Those are things that we need to explore. And Rick, do you have anything to add to that?
I think just in my interactions with the single men, and that, having that burden, having that experience of seeing just desperate needs, seeing circumstances, seeing the whole range, mental illness, the drug, alcohol piece, there's still that base need, that what we'll call the triage, the emergency piece, that you see it in the larger cities. I mean, people in this community probably donate money to the Salem and Portland Gospel Rescue Mission, but we're going to have that. I'll be honest, I have that burden to be part of a men's facility for the community, but that cross-section of men, you've got all kinds in there, like you were referring to, some that just need that swift kick in the tail, to that group that they just need to be connected. They actually have to have, kind of like what we came out of in our recent homelessness roundtable at the library. I think the cross-section was, we came back to, you have to have a home base. You have to have a place to start where there's safety, there's security, you can shower, you can be rested, you can feel like there's some place of trust to start, again, beginning the connections. And I think for me, that was kind of this wake-up call 4 years ago, Martha, that at the mission, we were at least attempting that. But it was so vast, and sometimes the needs were so intense that you do have to direct and connect them. But I hope that speaks to some of what you're thinking.
Martha, we have another question.
Mine's more of a comment, and bear with me here. I've had a really transformative last couple of weeks, and this started a couple of years ago when I tried to take in a friend who had an Oxycontin addiction. He was in Hawaii. He was headed for suicide, and so I talked him into coming, and I took him out to my studio out on Highway 18 and brought him in and just tried super hard and failed miserably. And at the end of that, 9 months or 6 months later, I sent him on his way. I struggled with that decision for a really, really long time. Then in January of that year, or December or January, I think it was January of the year we had snow, just last year I guess it was, I ran into Stephen, Ron, and John hanging out under an awning downtown in the snow, and I had kind of avoided them, even though I always reached out in a generally nice way to them. I had yet to really get to know them, and so I saw it was snowing, I recognized they were homeless, and so I went and had like a 3-hour conversation. And then we all went out to breakfast, as another friend incidentally just drove by and took us out. It was, I wrote an op-ed on it, and it was in the paper. It was a really great experience, but afterwards I tried to plug myself into Sea-Wish. I talked to coming to work with Howie, but I just didn't have a lot of time. And so the whole time I've been thinking about, and for a year, I've been thinking about this, everything. And so I come to find out my friend that I sent on his way went up to Auburn, and he met a woman that he moved in with and took control of her life. She had an 18-year-old autistic son and a 14-year-old. It's a really emotional story for me, but I'm going to try to make it through okay. And so he kicked out her support structure, and then last April the 18-year-old died. And even though the 18-year-old had blunt force trauma, the police ruled it a suicide, or not a suicide, but an accident, because his mom worked in as a handicapped school teacher for elementary school. She had a lot of credibility. Well, move ahead to January, he was arrested for child abuse on the 14-year-old, which I can only describe as torture. Now, this is someone, you got to understand, who in his 20s was a really beautiful human being. Oxycontin, which, their calculation was made at some point that was a cheaper way to go than physical therapy, like it has, and I know we all know a lot of people that have probably gone on the pain medication thing. Well, when they arrested him for child abuse, they put the fire to the feet of the mom, and it turns out that it was, about the 18-year-olds, and then she confessed that he had actually murdered her son. It was a super traumatic thing for me to hear about, and it just really got me thinking for the last few weeks about this whole issue. And so what I hear, we all have this common goal to want to do something. I see all you people who are out there just killing yourselves, working so hard on it. And I think, gosh, with all the people in town that do care about this, why aren't we having more involvement? And so I had a revelation about a week ago or 2 weeks ago that what was lacking was the lack of connection. I don't know if we're talking about Columbine or school shootings in general, and being in a state of trauma the last couple of weeks has just made me recognize trauma everywhere I go. I see people at the coffee shop. The other day, 2 women and 2 different tables, obviously in shock, obviously in trauma, and no one's paying attention to them. And it's in our isolation, this indifference is born. And so I thought, well, how do we combat? Or I don't even want to use a combat anymore. How do we address that? And how do we, really have a substantive change that's fundamental on every level? And so what I've been thinking about is a twofold thing. First is citizens journalism. I've been interviewing these people. I started a Facebook page called Kindness, Compassion, Generosity, and Gratitude. I want to add honesty or truth to it. I don't know yet. And so I've been interviewing these people. I've been putting those posts up online. I've been posting to the 3rd Street page. I love 3rd Street, stuff like that. It's already, some of these videos just in the last week have 300 views or something like that. You talk to a lot of young people. They want to get involved. So how do we get people involved? And so what I've been thinking of, and we had our first meeting last Sunday at Cornerstone Coffee. So we're going to do it again this Sunday. And what we're going to do is we're going to gather and we're going to go out into the community. The homeless is my, the longer term idea I have. But we go out into the community and we reach out to everybody. I think about all these people who are alone at home, elderly people who I feel like we failed miserably as a collective. I mean, I know a lot of people do a great job. But in that process of going out and helping people, I would think that it would be, very affirming, inspirational for both the people who are helping and for the people who are receiving help. And not only that, it's a naturally expansive process because you get more people involved, you get, the colleges, everything in there, and we could build a movement, I think, really pretty quick. I mean, I already have 200 likes on this page in just a little bit. Sorry. Yeah, I don't want to. Kindness, compassion, generosity, and gratitude.
All right, I want to pick something.
I did have one more thought, and then this is an important one.
Please make it quick, please.
Okay, I'm sorry to go on for so long. This is really important to me. So the thought is that as you gather a group to go do this, your mental health professionals, your people who are experts in their fields are the natural leaders, and you design the group that way and organize it that way. And then that way, the people who have the expertise in those fields can teach the entire group, and they can instruct us. And people who have the experience and know about the different individual situations can actually do something about it. So, you bet.
Thank you, but I do want to continue on something you talked about there on the difficulties on coordination. You want to do something, and where do you help the various pieces of the puzzle come together? Real quick, I'm going to cut you off because I want everybody here to have an opportunity to have something to say. So just excuse me a little bit, but I want to continue the conversation with what you started with the panel on the ability for the various agencies to coordinate. How do you see that in today's world? And Lee, I guess I'll start with you.
Actually, we see or hear very similar stories to yours periodically. Good people, well-intentioned, want to help. They see someone, they take them in, and it ends up in disaster, almost inevitably. And the problem is that good people they're leading with their heart, and they don't have the training to recognize things like addiction, things like people who have grown up just telling stories that will suck people in. Our case managers are well trained to recognize that and to hold people accountable, to set goals and hold them accountable to those goals. So our problem is we can barely afford the case managers we have. We're struggling constantly to find funding to keep our case managers working with people. Really, the help without the support goes nowhere as far as I'm concerned. People, and the problem is, people who've been homeless, if they not suffering from addictions or mental health issues, I mean true mental health issues, they are at the very least suffering from extreme depression. And they simply are in such a black hole, they can't see the way out. They have to have somebody who's trained in finances, who's trained in job searches, to work with them and say, okay, here's what finances do you have? Let's make a budget. How much are you going to need? How are we going to get there? Here's 3 steps that you do this week, and I'm going to check in on you next week. Those are the kinds of things that get people restabilized, if it's possible to get them restabilized. And there's just a whole group of people. I kind of divide it into 3 areas. There's a group of people that are never going to be able to be self-sufficient. They're elderly, they're disabled, severely disabled, they've got mental health issues that are overwhelming, schizophrenia, bipolar that's not treatable with medication or they can't stay on it. Those people are always going to have to be helped. There's a whole group of people that hit a hard spot. They hit a medical issue, diabetes. The one I got was a massive heart attack. He lost his job, he lost his home, and they were just looking for someone to help them get their business started again. Those people will drop into hopelessness for a couple of years, maybe a year. If they get help, they'll pull themselves back out. Then there's the chronic homeless, the drug addiction, the jail, the generational poverty. We had a girl in the mentor program I was running that had straight A's up to the 7th grade. She hit the 7th grade and she had straight F's because she realized she was from across the tracks. And she was a leader. She could get the kids doing anything she wanted, but she was going the wrong way. And when her mentor worked with her, she took her over to the University of Oregon, and the girl said, I don't want to be here. I don't like this. Get me out of here. I don't belong here. And she just kept saying, I don't belong here. And finally the mentor said, what on earth are you talking about? The girl said, no one I know has ever gone to college. I don't belong here. I can never go here. And that's that generational poverty mentality that sets in because they've lived in this for generations and nobody they know has ever gone to college or gotten a degree or graduated from high school. So there's just some things that you have to know how to handle each of those segments and what they need and how to work with them.
Mm-hmm.
all of us in this room, we'll come in here, we'll say our thing, but, if we know each other more, there's the answers. I mean, I really believe that in connecting, we can grow the group a lot faster, and also having an activity that is based around something that gives us a little boost, and that's why I like the idea of meeting weekly. We're going to do it every weekend or every Sunday at Cornerstone at noon, have a meeting and then go out. But also, I would imagine that our drug and alcohol counselors could instruct us all. That people who are experts at it can actually come together, and if we build more volunteers in those areas, the experts can come together and maybe learn something from each other as well, have more of a conversation, have more, because I imagine something much more sustained, long-term, and something that builds community all the way around. So.
And let me address that real quick. The belief of coordinating groups coming together. Elise, could you explain the coordination that goes on today amongst the helping agencies? What do you see that exists today that individuals may be able to fall in on versus the need to create something new? If you could help us out on that.
Sure. So we're actually doing on the service provider level, the thing keeps coming up, we're not coordinating. We're doing lots and lots of coordinating. People just may not be aware of it. And before I go into how people may be able to help, I'd like to just say that, I know that like YCAP works with Health and Human Services and Henderson House on partnerships. The Housing Authority actually has memorandums of agreement in place with Health and Human Services, YCAP, Corrections, Veteran Services, and Department of Human Services, where we actually fast-track vouchers through our program where we have set-asides, and people can refer people over to us that might fit into those specific areas to get fast-tracked through the program to get housed sooner. So we've done a lot of things. Our newest property that we just built in Newburgh actually was a mix of workforce housing and special needs housing. We're housers, we're not service providers or social workers, so we bring in the county adult mental health to provide the case services for that. I think, there's one of the things I love about our community is there's such a willingness to step up and help. If Co-op Ministries is facing something, how can we support them to resolve that issue? I appreciate what you're saying completely, and I think, there's plenty of ways to do what you're talking about. So I think the big thing is find out what agencies are doing and find out where the volunteer help is needed and try to fit in, because, we have Howie, that leads the soup kitchen, and, they need volunteers, and YCAP has volunteers at places and things like that. And, just finding something that's important to you and volunteering at that level and not trying to create the level.
You're probably the fifth or sixth person to suggest that.
Okay, we have one question in the back, please.
Hi, I heard from Ms. Means that you guys have a lot of money coming over the next 3 years, over $750,000. Is that right?
The total of the grant was $665,000, I think, for 3 years. So it's about 200. That's not what you meant. Do you remember how much that was? $260 a year is what it came out to.
$260 a year. And I'm hearing that a problem is the lack of housing availability. So have you guys thought about building more houses or investing that money in a purchase of a property that has a lot of units and possibly doing something like that? I'm not hearing that. I'm hearing a whole lot about you need money and you've got money coming, but the lack of housing is the issue. Are you looking at developing more housing?
That would be wonderful, except that the grants are very specific. We have to use the money exactly like the feds say they want it used. So that the veterans grant will not pay for us to develop housing.
Okay, I'm going to stay with that one quick. I've got your question, but I want to follow on with his to clarify. Bill, I don't think you probably know a little bit about the cost. To do additional housing, can you help us understand the amount of money it would take that we're talking about just to build a 20-bed shelter?
Yeah. This gentleman, I bet, Alan Evans, could probably better answer that right now.
Something like that would take about $3.5 million to do something. We're working on a project now that we're looking at in another county to be able to provide a center for emergency shelter on the bottom floor, reentry housing on a second floor, and apartments on a third. And that would be about 40 beds total for a project like that. But the problem is coming up with capital campaign and how much work you have to put into an effort like that. So something that we look at now takes 3.5 to 5 years before it's complete, something like that.
Is that including a sustainment plan, and what's the capital then to
Yes.
keep it sustaining?
It's a sustainable plan, the way that we look at it, because we have different case statements to help fund different projects. And we take the whole cost and we divide it into bed, and then we know what we're up against per day or per year, and we set a plan up to make that happen. So in that it has its own sustainability plan because there's such a high need for what it is that we're trying to do.
Okay, fantastic. We got one more question back here, and then after this question, I see some people kind of getting restless in the seats. It might be perhaps time to take a break. So one more question.
This isn't actually a question. I had our librarians here in the city of McMinnville get me some information yesterday, and I got it this evening. And Yamhill County 2014-2015 budget was $6,416,000 for 259 beds in the jail. Now, we have the police running around and arresting people for homelessness, basically around Walmart, running out campers and tents. And again, I'm going to say it, that if the city would simply give us a place out of town, we could take the problems of the chronic, the drugs, the alcohol, and the panhandling off of 3rd Street. So 3rd Street, McMinnville, can become #1 small street city in USA. Until the city addresses the problem and moves us out of the center of town, we are going to have this problem. And again, like I said, I want to focus on the aged, the emergency, and the chronic somewhere 24/7. We can put them somewhere, put a bed under their head, and a place to be.
All right, thanks. And just to give you an idea, the city doesn't own land outside the city. So with that, I'm going to go ahead and call for a break. Okay, things must be getting to that quietness time period, which means we have to start again. I'd like to do a couple things here. I'd like to, I've got a couple folks who mentioned that there was one thing we actually wanted to address on the homeless front that we forgot to address. And then if you would allow, if there's any additional questions, maybe we could take the homeless questions there. But we'd like to turn a little bit and go back to the affordable housing discussion. So kind of two things coming up here, and we got plenty of time to play with both. So if you want some injects or you have a question, please feel free to ask. Going back to the homeless question, and this is for anybody on the panel, is there anything in this discussion of the homeless that is counterintuitive? I.e., I'll be honest, I've heard it more than once. If you build it, they will come. All the homeless are transitory, and they just, they go around from where's the best deal. Could we talk a little bit about what you see, and then on the homeless count, can you give us some actual, how many people are McMinnvilleites, and how many people are just folks that are passing through? And let me start with Bill.
Every community that tries to address this problem faces the myth, and I really call it a myth, that you will suddenly become a homeless magnet. And not so much from our point in time count data, but when we were starting on our plan 10 years ago, we did an unscientific survey, but it was pretty comprehensive, more than 150 people. And one of the things we were looking at, we talked to people in soup kitchens and in our shelters, and looking at how long they had been homeless, the cause of their homelessness, where they were. 2/3 of them had been living in Lincoln County before they became homeless, half of them for 4 years or more. And again, were they coming to the coast because it was some kind of homeless paradise? No, because they had family there, because they had friends there, because they came to take a job. The same reasons anybody moves to a community. So I think if you could find some way to capture data like that, that might be the best way of counteracting that myth.
So I'm going to reiterate what he says. We hear that all the time too. We very seldom see people coming in that didn't come in for a particular reason. We had one that came from Texas. She came because she was escaping domestic violence, and her sister lived here. And then her sister was in a rental. She could only stay 2 weeks without endangering her sister's housing herself, so she had to be out with her kids on the street. Like you say, they come, if they do come, because the services are not here. They don't come to rural communities because we've got waiting lists. People coming in, there's no point in them coming. So the ones that do come because they were offered a job and they got here and they were laid off. They've come because their brother, cousin, aunt lives here and said they could stay with them until they got their feet on the ground, and then their housing was jeopardized. They come for some reason, but it's not for the services.
I just kind of wanted to go back to the counterintuitive and an earlier question that you had about is there an answer to this? And in one level, there is an answer. It's called providing people a home, not a house, but a home. And there are states across this country that are making tremendous success. Utah is one that probably people have heard. But because the fact of the matter is, if I have a mental health issue, if I have a disability, if I have some other challenge, the fact that I don't have a home that I control, that's my space, it's hard to avail yourself of those services. And once you have that home, it gives you a base in which then you surround yourself with services, but you also surround yourself with community and those kinds of social networks that help you retain that housing. And again, Utah is one of those. I don't know if we have any Jon Stewart fans and you saw the interview with Utah, but it was kind of, well, how did you solve homeless? Well, we gave them a home. What? You gave them a home?
Could you talk a little bit about the Salt Lake program that you're mentioning right now?
It really was initiated out of the governor's office, where they said, we are going to address chronic homelessness and we are going to end it. And so he dedicated a person who went around the state, rural areas as well as urban areas, talked to a variety of folks, so obviously service providers, but business people, landlords, the whole community, and said, we're going to get housing for these folks. And they put some money into that, and then the services will wrap around folks when they're in that housing. If they're able to work, then we'll expect that, and we'll bring employment assistance. If they're not, then we will provide the other kind of supportive services to help them retain it. And they, you never get to a zero chronic homeless, but they have come as close as any state that I've seen. And again, when I hear you talk, I've been a service provider most of my career. Services are important. You cannot service your way out of homeless. You just can't. You have to have homes. You have to have a physical place with the social networks that support that, for then the services to come in and really allow people to, take advantage of them.
I wanted to make sort of a comment. You'll have to excuse my allergies. In regards to if you build it, they will come. One of the things that I'm from the co-op, by the way. One of the things that we're experiencing at the co-op actually is if you build it, they will come. And that is because we've opened our doors and opened our hearts to the people, and they've come. And I think part of that is not people coming, from Portland or elsewhere, and I don't think they need to come from those places because they're coming from alleyways and they're coming from forests. And they're coming from places where they're dehumanized. So I sort of resent the if you build it, they will come, because I think that's a great motto to go with. And one of the things that we're experiencing, and I just think it's really sad, is that having a tent in the back part of our church is home for people. And just recently, those homes were taken away. So now people are calling a sleeping bag with a tarp over it home at the co-op. And they're not calling it home because it's this mansion of a place or it's this wonderful thing. They're calling it home because that's where they feel safe. And that's where they feel loved. And I think as a community, there's a lot of people who need to feel loved and need to feel safe. And if we do build it, they will come and they will excel. Maybe they're in a place where they could get a job, but without a house, that's really hard to maintain. Maybe they're in a place where they're dealing with an illness, but if you're dying on the front doorstep of a church, it makes it really hard to get better. There's a lot of reasons, like Lee Means said, that people are homeless. And if you give them a home, we as a community do a great job at addressing the other issues. There's a place at least once a day to get a meal here. You can get a 6-month shower pass at the community center for $47. At the co-op, you can get toothbrush and toothpaste and laundry soap and anything you need. We will help you find it. But what we don't have is homes for people. And I think one of the things that Mark was asking about and maybe was struggling with the question of is where can we tell people they can have a home? And I think there's plenty of land and space and love in this community that to have people here who don't have a home is is really just despicable. And if we can't just open a plot of land where somebody could put a tent, I can't understand that from a community level. I can't understand that from a financial level. And I can't understand that from a human level. And so tonight, as we talk about all these things, I'm really searching for, as a community, we know we can do better, and yet, why aren't we?
I'm sorry, there was one. Sorry. Thanks. So we've heard a lot that both from service providers and community members that there's this desire for a housing first solution. And so you said in Utah what worked was the governor took the leading role on that. So I have kind of two parts of a question. One is, how would a small community like McMinnville get the ball rolling on that sort of an idea? We have great services, but money is restricted and deemed to go in certain places. Budgets are set out long in advance. So what are some steps that a community like McMinnville could take to look at a housing first type solution is part one of my question. And then part two is, are there other programs that address subsections of the homeless population that are low or no cost that, again, a community of our size could take on? I know a little bit about a program that Pastor McHill told me about in Beaverton that's putting kids that are aging out of foster care, setting up basically rental agreements with families in that area. And I think if I remember correctly, they've taken 12 kids and placed them in houses, and now these kids are no longer not only homeless, but they've established rental histories, etc. And I've tried to learn a lot about that program, and it's very hard to learn about. It's not very accessible web-wise. But so a program like that, or other low-cost, no-cost programs, can the panel kind of try to answer those two parts of the question, or those two questions, please? Thank you. Thanks.
Could I jump on the first part?
Yep.
I was going to suggest, gatherings like tonight, that's a big part of it, coming together, educating yourselves, educating other people in the community, and then advocacy, consistent advocacy at the local, regional, and state level. I mean, talking to your legislators and being a public official, it can be a challenging job. I mean, think about those folks sitting in that building right now in Salem. They've got people hitting them up every day saying, we're not spending enough on education. We're not spending enough on public safety. We don't have enough to go around in the human services realm. And the message that I'm trying to hammer home, and maybe if they hear it, I mean, they're hearing it from a few hundred people around the state, but maybe if they hear it from several thousand, it'll hit home, that by investing in housing, you're investing in all those things. I mean, I think everybody probably already knows children who are not in a stable housing situation, they do not do as well in school. They have more health problems, both physical and emotional. Public safety, again, the chronic homeless folks are probably consuming a disproportionate share of the public safety resources. Health and human services, one of the big things we're doing with the whole big investment at the state level in coordinated care organizations, that they say we want to kind of move the needle and go from a system that's based on treating the symptoms to really preventing illness. And what better way to keep somebody from cycling through the emergency room every week than putting them in that stable housing. But I think, public officials have to, the supporters of education, and I number myself one of them, do a great job of packing the Capitol every year, standing for children. Wouldn't it be great and if there were a couple of thousand people at the Capitol one day standing for housing?
So there's a couple of things that I want to address in what you said. First of all, our former governor, Kitzhaber, put $100 million in bonds, I think, into his budget. And thankfully, our new governor, Brown, is continuing that. It's still in there. She's pushing forward. And that $100 million, my understanding, is dedicated to structure, homes, apartments, housing for homeless people. That's going to play out over 5 years, am I right? 5 years. And it's based on bonds, so it's going to be, I think I read somewhere that was going to amount to about 1,500 houses a year. Or not houses, but apartments or some kind of housing, depending on what we apply for. In my mind, it's groups like this right here who are coming together right now that are going to be ready to apply for that money. That we've got to be ready for that. So that's one thing. To have us ready to act the minute the budget is passed. Be ready for that. The other thing that you were talking about, the Beaverton program, we operate a safe shelter program in family homes. It's a safe shelter program for kids under the age of 18, 17, and 11 to 17-year-olds. People don't realize what it takes to run a program like that. The safety of the children, the safety of the host homes, the training that host homes have to have, it's very, very extensive, and it takes quite a bit of money to operate one of those programs, actually. We operated on about $100,000 a year. Not quite, $80,000 a year, I think is probably more accurate. We have a transitional living program for 17 to 21-year-olds that's for those foster kids aging out and for kids that have been just kicked out. That's another program that's close to $100,000 a year. Just to operate it with oversight, with recruitment of homes, with training, with all the things you have to do.
Was there a question? Was there a
I
question?
noticed there's an ad in the paper for host homes needed in Emerald County. And I have done. Can you hold it till we get to a microphone, please?
Sorry. What happened? I'm right here. I helped start that host home program years ago, and we hosted teenagers who are at our home. It's extremely rewarding. There's an ad in the paper all the time for new homes needed. So that is something everyone in this room who wants to do something could do right now.
And then I think we had one question. Lauren? Yeah, I was just going to kind of piggyback on the question about programs. There are a number of programs throughout the country that address different levels of homelessness. And some of them are more costly than others. There's one out of Seattle, the Tent City program, that is actually a very low-cost program. And they utilize different resources, such as colleges and whatnot, to have helpers to volunteer as, social workers, those kind of things, helping people one-on-one. And it actually is self-governed by the people that live on the tent city. It's a matter of just having a plot of ground, really. Probably some insurance there, but the cost overall of that program is very, very low. We're not talking about, $3.5 million here. We're talking about a very low-cost solution that would at least address the folks that are on the streets, and that could be done very, very low cost.
If you search out online, there's even, I've seen it, and we had some people interested in pursuing this, but it didn't come to fruition. Tent Cities Toolkit. It's like a DVD with a whole wealth of information, best practices in places who have done that, and how to address some of those issues that you raised and others.
Wasn't there a model for something like this already in place that went away called the YMCA and the YWCA for people to come and take a shower and have a meal and a place to stay and have an address, to have a resume for applications? People have cell phones now, so you can get a phone call. Whatever happened to that particular model? Because couldn't that be a foundation that's already been used? You don't have to reinvent the wheel, it's already there. Whatever happened to that?
The YMCA, I in my last job in Modesto, folded for lack of money and the inability to support their facility. So.
For other things, I'd like to go back a little bit to Remy's initial question is there anything that we can do other than high dollar value things? Of course, one of the things would be policy. You talk about legislative, get in with and talk to your congressman. Is there anything policy-wise that either a county or a city municipality can do to help promote affordable housing?
That's me. So I'm going to give a presentation to the City Council on May 12th, and I'm going to go into a bunch of things that could be done with the zoning policies and ordinances that other places have done that would be the low-cost policy type items. So I'll be going into that more, probably, we don't want to go into that too deeply tonight, but May 12th, I'll be going into that further for the city. And we keep talking about just building and building and building, and we need to build and build and build, but I am always looking for land locally, and it is just not out there. Land that is available and large enough to build any type of larger developments on. So, that'll be one of the things that, as we talk to people, and one of the things I'll just throw out there right now is if you come across affordable land, let one of us know about it, and, definitely me, because we're always looking. We have money to land bank and, look at some of these things. And like I said, the model that we did in Newburgh, we had units for chronically mentally ill, and that could, partner with some of the homeless things, and along with workforce. So we are not opposed to doing any of that. We just need to find affordable land to do it on.
I wanted to mention one policy tool specifically that could become available, and if folks are interested in advocating for it. Has anybody here heard of inclusionary zoning? Yes, I bet that's one thing. Okay. Basically what that is allowing a city or a county as a condition of approval of a multi-unit housing development to require that some percentage of the units sell at like no more than average market rate to be affordable to, say, an individual or family earning 100% of area median income or less. 48 states in this country allow local governments to use inclusionary zoning. 2 of them do not, Oregon and Texas. After years of effort to repeal the state ban on inclusionary zoning, finally has gained some traction. It has passed the House of Representatives. It's now in the state Senate. So I would suggest advocating with your state senator to support that. And then if it does pass, I know the governor has already said she plans to sign it, then start talking to your city officials that when somebody comes to them and wants to build, say, a 50-unit housing development, make one of the conditions of approval that at least some of those be market rate homes.
Thank you, Commissioner Hall. I think we have a question from Councilor Miki.
We have two. Okay. Just a brief one. This has kind of come up peripherally.
it sounds to me like we want land, but we want land in a city. Land outside the city is away from services and other things like that. I just kind of want that clarified, the concept of land, because it seems rather important, you know, for people to reach amenities. Could somebody speak to that?
So one of the things when we go in to apply for funding with the state, one of the things that they look for is your proximity to transportation and your proximity to services. And so, especially if maybe you're doing an elderly project or a project for special needs, they're really going to want to see those things. If it's workforce, you know, it might be able to be a little further out, but you get points based on, you know, the distance from those type of items. And so that's why, I mean, you know, you can put homeless camp outside of the city limits. How are they going to access the services that they need?
I just wanted to piggyback on what you were talking about. I know it was pretty devastating for the people to have to leave the church grounds and their homes and a place that they felt safe. And when I was in Eugene, they have these things, and they're called Conestoga huts. And they, you can break them down and move them really easily. And why couldn't something like that be possible for a church ground or maybe, and I think in Eugene, they have them dotted around the city. They're not all in an encampment, so to speak. So, but you can you can look it up. Anybody can look it up. It's Lane County, Conestoga Huts, and I think it'd just be really great if we could have something like that here, or maybe a pilot program.
And I can talk a little bit to that. There's a process just to make sure that, because all the neighborhood needs to agree, the whole city needs to agree that they want to do zoning, because we zone based on the needs of the citizens and what they want. But there is a process that if somebody wants a conditional use or they want to change an ordinance, they come before the building commission. We have yet to see anyone come before the building commission to ask for any kind of use permits for any kind of camp. We have yet to see one person do that. That is the entry point for changing the ordinances.
Idea for a low-cost approach, I don't know, has anybody looked into, I know Eugene for many years has had a program to allow limited car camping, and then more recently Springfield allowed that as well. And you know, that's something that can be controversial, and it can face NIMBYism, and yet from the research I've done, it sounds like it's been a pretty effective program. You know, I talked to one of the officers in the Newport Police Department, just kind of sounding him out, and he said, well, you know, as with anything, the devil's in the details, but at least philosophically, it was something that he would probably be inclined to support, because he said, I know for a fact folks are sleeping in their cars all around town anyway, and if it was in a controlled environment and I knew where they were, I would prefer that. And, you know, one of the things in doing research on the Eugene program that really struck me, you know, I think they started out allowing it on public property only and churches, but then they started opening it up to private businesses, and the owner of a auto wrecking yard started allowing, I think, 4 people to camp on the property, and was just overjoyed because said they had quite a theft problem of people stripping the cars in the middle of the night. But all of a sudden, when people realized, hey, there's people sleeping here overnight, that problem pretty much evaporated.
Like I said, my concern is basically for some of the people that are out there that have the drug problems, that have the mental illnesses, and like I said, an elderly coming off the street getting kicked out of a place, to just have somewhere to go at any time of the day or night. That's my main concern. And I think that if we had the land and we set these tents and we put people in, you know what, welcome their campers, welcome their trailers, we'll put them on the back lot, we segregate them. But the thing is that we also got to understand that the land is the most expensive part of this whole project. Now, the funds will come in from every angle if we just have the place to set down. We've got builders, we've got carpenters, we've got people that are ready to work, people that'll put the crew that we put together in our work camp and our home camp to go do the work to strip the lumber to build the houses. But the thing is that the money will come in from all angles. We don't have no budget. All we need is a place to be. Just that's all I ask is a place to be.
Okay, going back to the coordinating piece on trying to get solutions from out there on the table, any barriers that you're seeing that we could attack when private nonprofit works with faith-based nonprofits, when faith-based nonprofits work with government, when government works with private individuals? Is there anything that we have barriers up that we could attack on?
I don't know if it's so much barriers. I think it's more opportunities that if we all work together, we can figure out how to do things. For example, the faith-based, they have a lot more flexibility than we do on our side and on the government side. And so maybe they don't have the expertise or the capacity to, figure out zoning or maybe figure out some of the grant writing, but that's where some of us that are more knowledgeable in those areas can assist them, and they can assist us. And I mean, because we're all trying to come to the same place, right? We're trying to assist the folks that are in our communities to have a place to live. I mean, we're all trying to do that. That's why we're here tonight. So I think if we all work together, and figure out the niches that people play, I think that's where we can really have impact in this area.
There's a question back here.
Oh, I'll keep it short. I think as I've sat and thought about the faith-based piece, I keep coming back to something that you and I talked about, Martha, that this role definition, the role that something like I keep coming back to triage, transitioning, that initial start, that beginning, starts within a lot of areas that where we overlapped, where we can have the most impact, the things that we can specialize, our niches, is really key in understanding that. As I've gotten into this process of really learning about my community, I've seen that there's things along the political lines, and I think the things you hit on are really true about the faith-based piece, that I wrote down on my paper that we ought to be locking arms rather than locking horns on so much of this. But real true root cause problem solving, it may sound real kind of regimented and kind of anal sounding, I guess, to people, but we have to find something that earns that public, that private trust, that investor trust that says we're going to be effective, and everybody knows their part, and everybody's not Michael Jordan, but we do our piece and we do our timing, and it starts to come together. And maybe I could go off on a lot of different directions on that, but the faith-based piece of it really does have to be, I believe, in that initial transition, that initial triage mode, we have to have potentially some things zoning like with our mission. We're residential. We've got families, we've got women and children and men in there. We have to be respectful of all those things as we take people in. But to expand that, I even wrote down some numbers about what it costs. Let's say we build these facilities. The mission, it's still about $92,000 to $95,000 a year to maintain our mission for 15 to 17 people. That's just the cost of mortgage and all the other financial things I could break down for you, because we're feeding. We're a great community. And there's so much good work going on, I've found out as I've been in this. I talked to Jerry, I talked to you guys. I know that there's connections being made. But we have to find our place. We have to find our place in that transition to it, if that helps.
I think this is quite educational, this little piece of this meeting. we could have people in car places. We could have people in Conestoga places. We could have people, the quickest and absolutely quickest would be this tent city that's on somebody's property. But there's a lot of little pieces that don't cost a gazillion dollars. If we can get involved with, if there's any attorneys that work in our favor, if there's any doctors and psychologists and psychiatrists to take their piece of this, it doesn't have to be massive. It doesn't. I don't think it has to be a high cost thing, but we got to start somewhere.
All right, well, speaking and starting somewhere, I'd like to draw it to close tonight with the question of where can an individual start? If you're a member who wants to get in and you want to become involved in this conversation and you are a lay community member, where's the place for them? Lise, I'm going to start with you.
Sure. So when I had thought about this question, I kind of wrote down some bullet points. So, I mean, if you're just out in the public and you're just now getting involved, I think the first thing to do is recognize we have a problem, and I think we're beginning to do that. Recognize what we're doing well in this community, understand who's doing what. We have a really good list of community resources and services on the Housing Authority's website. If you haven't looked at that, it's amazing. It's 4 pages of what our local community already has in place. So I think that's important. And then to recognize our gaps, which is what we're talking about tonight. Support by donating or volunteering for the organizations that are working towards the solutions. And then, like I said, keeping the eye out for affordable land, or land where we can do something like a tent city. I mean, that's going to be key in everything that we're moving for here.
So everything that you said, and when we're talking volunteering, there's not just our homeless count, there's the Community Connect that's coming up in May 15th, thank you, that needs a lot of volunteers, and it's a place where you as the public can really see all the different agencies that are working on these problems. And even if you're volunteering, you can still walk around and get a sense of all the services that are offered in this county. It's a pretty amazing experience because almost every provider is there in some form or another. And like Ellie said, we need host homes. We keep talking, we put it out there. We want host homes in each community, so if we get a runaway kid, they don't have to leave their school. They'll be right there in the same community until we can mediate them back into their family situation, if that's possible. But the other way is to get involved, as Martha said, with the zoning issues. YCAP had an offer of a 2,700 square foot, I guess, I would have called it a modular home, but it turns out it's deemed a mobile home because it could be moved. And we couldn't put it on our property if it was we could put it on our property if it was going to have a foundation and no wheels or racking underneath it, but it couldn't house people. It could only be like a training center during the day in our particular area. Now, we have 5 acres out there, of which we're using about 3 acres. So those kinds of zoning and rules, if we could get a little flexibility in those, we might be able to start making an impact on some of it. So those are places that I see all of you being a big help.
Well, I agree with everybody. first you learn to push the button so people can hear you. I think you bring yourself. So for me, it's when you walk down the street and you see a homeless person, you acknowledge them. That's a gift. I think if you're a carpenter, then you get involved with Habitat Humanity, or you get involved with an elderly program where they may be ready to lose their house because it's not safe and someone's going to take them out. You know, if you're a parent like I was, my kids went sports. Homeless kids don't get to do sports. They don't get to do extracurricular activities, even if they're in a housing situation, because they don't have the equipment to do it. They don't have the transportation to do it. I know in my community, in a very poor neighborhood, a very rich neighborhood came and supported the basketball team there because that poor neighborhood's parents weren't able to do that. So I think you just look at your own gifts and your own skills, and there's a place to put them. When I was operating a program for homeless families, our entire shelter system was done by churches. And it was done by members who went to their church and said, we could do this. We've got a room. We can fix it up. We can host a family. We can host 2 families. It didn't cost us anything. And it was a great, great service. So that's my thoughts.
Let me mention one more low-cost alternative that I don't think has been brought up yet. I don't know if you've explored it here. It's launched in Lincoln City, Interfaith Hospitality Network, where you get a network of churches on a rotating basis, usually once a month, hosting families. You establish overnight, you establish a day center and services as well, and the community in Lincoln City has really embraced that amazingly well, and after a little over a year, they're off to a great start. But at the risk of repetition, educate yourself, educate others, volunteer, donate, advocate. Realize it's a formidable problem, but don't lose hope. I really am always one who believes that knowledge is power, facts are power, that you're always going to deal with NIMBYism, you're always going to be dealing with the folks who have the attitude that, oh, these are just a bunch of shiftless folks who think the world owes them a living and aren't willing to give anything. And so when I was in a very spirited debate with an acquaintance on that, just one fact absolutely blew him away, and I think hopefully at least got him on the path to re-examining the issue. If you're between the ages of 18 and 30 in this country, you know what one single factor is going to make you twice as likely to be homeless as the general population? Anybody want to venture a quick guess? No. Being a veteran of the U.S. military. And think about that. You're taken away from your home, your education, your job, your natural supports. You often come back with physical and emotional trauma. So of course that puts you at high risk for homelessness. And if somebody is willing to put their life on the line for their country, don't we at least owe them the decency of a place to live when they come back?
I'm a 50-year McMinnville guy that never knew this dimension of my community. 4 years ago, a friend asked me to go see Cheryl. They could probably find something for me to do at the mission. And so there was some shifts and some learning, but never in my wildest dreams did I think that you would come face to face, that if you invest some of yourself, what you're going to see and hear and learn. So that piece of it's important. I think the awareness is really high right now. I don't know how we cash in on that or enhance that. Our community is aware, becoming more aware, not just because we see the chronic, but it's this stepping up. And I write down time, talent, and treasure. I suppose I can look around the room and at this panel and we'd say we've probably got one of 3, but it's all about priorities. And as I go around and talk to businesses and in this development piece that I'm doing as part of the mission, it's just to connect. It's just to talk to people, just have conversations. And, there's so much demand, pulls for every cause, everything. I really believe that in my heart of hearts, it's a priority. For the ministry that we're part of, for who we are at the mission, there are things that we probably could have happen. We'll probably talk to the city council if you come and visit us about the zoning and the conditional use permit and how we could expand effectively and earn that trust and keep that trust and do those things and not be able to turn anyone away. I had an email from the house manager while I was sitting here tonight about what we could talk about, and it's volunteers. Yeah, we could use paid staff, and boy, a bigger space to not turn somebody away. I think the baby step thing, the start somewhere, do something little, for us, maybe as the faith community, that maybe is our piece. You've got to start somewhere, little by little. Where your treasure is, there your heart will be also. Maybe a little bit of giving in any of those three areas. So,
I don't think that could be said any better. So I want to say thank you to all of you, because you are here, and that's very valuable. As we educate ourselves, we'll get to know more, and we'll find out what we want to do as a community to attack this problem. I want to give a special shout out to Shoshana Oppenheim. Come, stand up so they can see. She's been the mic. But she reached out to McMinnville. She is from Oregon Housing and Community Services, and she has been out around Oregon collecting data on what Oregon wants to do. Like we are getting educated, Oregon State is getting educated.
And I just want to take advantage of the fact that I have the mic in my hand and thank both Martha and Lee for helping me put together such a terrific evening. Every community I go to, the bar is raised, and definitely the turnout tonight. Thank you so much for participating. The bar has definitely been raised. It's been a wonderful evening to share with all of you. So thank you so much to our panel, and thank you to Martha and Lee for all the time and effort that you put into putting tonight together. Thank you.
Ladies and gentlemen, good night.